Okay, we're just trying to align our streaming on our side. Okay, all right. I'm going to...
Sorry, how long should this opening be?
It's really up to you. I'm not going to be speaking to you until you're done. It doesn't have to be long. It's really up to you.
So when I'm done, I just share my slides. I direct them to my slides. I share my slides. I keep going.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. 5, 4. Okay, maybe before, let me just spotlight you there. Okay. Counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good day, colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come present our work here today. We are very excited to be able to share this incredible work that we've done over a period of 4 years, where we've worked in TVETs and universities with young women around issues of sexual violence. So today I'll be presenting to you the formative research that we've conducted, where we developed and piloted a Ntombi Vimbela intervention. This is a manualized sexual violence intervention for post-school education and training female students in South African campuses. So I'll be taking you through the slides that I've developed today, and we can then have a discussion over this work that we've done. If there are any follow-up questions that you have, we'll discuss that at the end of my presentation. I am now going to share my slides just to take you through the work that we've done. So just to acknowledge the team that I've worked with on this work that we have done, just allow me a minute to share my slides. I've worked with colleagues that are listed on the screen where we've developed this work in institutions of higher learning. I'm from the SAMRC Agenda and Health Research Unit based in Pretoria. So just as an outline of the work, of the presentation that I'll be sharing to you, I'll be presenting the background. I'll be sharing a little bit about the work, why it was conceptualized, what we did. I'll also tell you about the aims and objectives of this research. I'll take you through the formative research findings that we found when we conducted this research. I will take you through the development process. I will describe Ntombi Vimbela intervention. I will then share with you the findings from the pilot of the intervention. I will then move over and conclude with implications and future work that we're planning to do. So just as a background, we all know that young women in higher education institutions in South Africa are at increased risk of experiencing sexual gender-based violence. And in that context, we also know that there is limited research to understand the extent of this problem, that being the prevalence, but also the drivers of this sexual gender-based violence in South African higher education settings, which is very, very important that we understand that so that we can inform the development of the interventions that are aimed to address the problem. I would also like to acknowledge the incredible work that has been done by the Department of Higher Education, which has developed the policy framework to address GBV in the PSET setting. Also to highlight that even in the framework, there is an acknowledgement of the limited understanding of the occurrence of SGBV in these institutions. Not much is known about related to the drivers, the prevention methods that can be used, reporting processes that are used in these institutions, to even investigate the issues whenever these occurrences are reported in the institution. So these are some of the gaps that are highlighted in the NSP, in the policy framework. And what this is telling us is that there is a need for interventions to be able to address this. But before we can do that, we need to understand the setting, understand the prevalence, understand the drivers, so that we can inform development of the intervention. So in terms of the activities and the work that we've done, really our study was aimed at gathering context-specific data to inform the development of this SGBV prevention intervention for PSET setting. We undertaken a number of activities which were linked to the objectives that we were aiming to achieve at each stage of the research process. The first activity that we did was conducting a mixed methods formative research study, where the aim was to gather the data to be able to inform this intervention that we did. And this was done between the period of September 2018 up to March 2019. We then moved to the second activity, where we used the findings from the formative research that we conducted in one to develop Ntombi Vimbela intervention. That is the name that we are calling the intervention that we developed. It is a manualized sexual violence intervention. It targets female students, particularly the first year undergraduate students between the ages of 18 to 30. And some of you might be wondering why the first year students. That is because it was influenced, or kind of a key finding that came out of the formative research, to say that in these institutions, yes, every woman is vulnerable to experience sexual violence, but we found that first-year students are particularly vulnerable to the experience of sexual violence, hence us trying to target the first-year female students. And then the third activity was when, after development of the intervention, we went to the institutions themselves. We piloted Ntombi Vimbela through the workshops that we conducted with the young women. And really the aim here was to test the acceptability of the content, but to also test how feasible are the delivery methods that we use to deliver the intervention. And that was conducted between August and October 2019. So what are the methods that we used in the first activity, which was the formative research? We worked in 2 conveniently selected universities and 6 TVET institutions, and these were selected in collaboration with Department of Higher Education. These were the sites where we worked. Together they were 8. We quantitatively surveyed female students between age 18 and 30, and the total was 1,272. We also conducted qualitative research in a form of focus group discussions with female students themselves. 13 groups were interviewed to be able to gather this data. We also worked with groups of men, where we had 8 male students, where we conducted focus group discussions with them. We also conducted peer educator FGDs in amongst 13 groups. We also worked with student support staff in these institutions, and 18 of them were interviewed in this process. We also spoke to the survivors of sexual violence, and we were able to interview 15 of those. In terms of the research, the quantitative findings amongst the students that we did, you can see that I've listed for you number of students that we worked with in the TVETs, number of students that we worked with in the institutions. What our data showed us is that 20% had experienced sexual violence in the past year. And amongst these, 17.3 had experienced partner sexual violence, 7.5 had experienced non-partner rape. And what this then is telling us is that, yes, all of them were vulnerable to experience sexual violence, but it was interesting for us to learn that when you're comparing amongst different categories of students, TVET participants were the ones that were most vulnerable if you're comparing them with the 15% of the university students. We then went deeper to our data to try and understand what are the factors that influence this vulnerability to the experience of sexual violence. What makes these young women to experience this sexual violence? We found a number of vulnerability factors. Food insecurity was one of the issues. We found high levels of food insecurity amongst the students, which were increasing vulnerability to the experience of sexual violence. And I'll try and unpack that later when I talk about this, the sexual behaviors that these young women ended up, engaging in, some of them which were risky, because of some of these structural drivers trying to make sure that they find food and can provide for themselves and be able to survive. We found differences when we were comparing between TVET and university students around food security issues, that again, a similar consistent finding amongst TVET participants that were more vulnerable compared to university students to food insecurity issues. We also learned that childhood sexual abuse was associated with the vulnerability. Those that had experienced childhood sexual abuse were more vulnerable to, the experience of sexual violence at this point in their lives. We also found that female students that had partners that were controlling were likely to experience intimate partner violence. Those were in relationships that, with men that were controlling, trying to dictate what happens, when sex will be done, how it will be done, were more likely to experience intimate partner violence. We also learned about the high mental health issues that these female students were experiencing. Many of them, our data showed that they experienced depressive symptoms, PTSD, they had suicidal thoughts, and again, mental health was amongst the vulnerabilities to the experience of sexual violence. Now, the issue of risky sexual behavior that I spoke about earlier on, we found that some of these young women were in relationships with multiple partners. They were engaging in transactional sex, and you would understand now the association with food insecurity. It could be that, they were not willingly engaging in these behaviors, but they were trying to avert some of these structural challenges that they were experiencing, one being food insecurity. But we also found high levels of harmful alcohol use amongst the female students, and that also being amongst the factors that are associated with the experience of sexual violence in higher education institutions. So moving on to the qualitative data and what we found there, our findings show that, there were a number of factors that were driving. Now, this was found through qualitative research where we spoke with the students. What I presented earlier on was data that is coming out from the survey, but this was through the discussions, the conversations that we had with these different categories of students, through the focus group discussions, through the interviews that we did with them. We learned that in terms of the perpetration, because earlier on I did highlight that we also spoke to men, we tried to find out what are some of the factors that are making them to perpetrate this experience. But even not only themselves, other people around the institution, other men, not necessarily talking about what they are doing. We learned that perpetration is driven by acceptance of patriarchal social gender norms, where some of the boys are from families where they are taught that, a man is the person whom, when they say this, their word goes, they get to dictate, in the home, what happens when sex is done. All those patriarchal gender norms were some of the issues that they carried, in their lives, and was influencing some of the behaviors regarding perpetration of sexual violence. We also found that they bring this into their intimate relationships with their partners, where they even feel sexual entitlement to, once somebody says they love you, it means that, they are entitled to their bodies. Whenever you want to have sex with them, you don't even have to get consent. Consent was when somebody said yes to the relationship. We also found that some of them do this because of the pressure that they feel from their friends. Issues of hypersexuality amongst the men, acceptance of rape myths and attitudes, being victim blaming, that it's a woman's fault that they've been sexually violated. Why was somebody dressing in a particular way? Why was somebody in a particular place? Why did you take my money? Why did you allow me to buy you drinks when you think I'm just doing that for free? So all of those beliefs contributed to male perpetration of sexual violence. Amongst the female students, we found that vulnerability was associated with poor socioeconomic background, some of them coming from background of lack at home. They come here, they don't have food, they don't have clothes, and they succumb to the pressure to have material resources. When they come in, they want to look a particular way without having not understanding at that point the socioeconomic background working against them, and they will try to make means to be able to still find these things. At the end of the day, agreeing to relationships that are controlling, are not good, they are toxic to them, just so they can be able to feel that need as they come into this context. Engaging in transactional relationships, but some of them also being naive when they come to this context. Accepting gifts, accepting money without thinking that these men are actually doing some of these things to be able to get something from it. We also found issues of poor safety and security in some of the campuses, exposing young women to the experience of sexual violence. Residences were found as hotspots where some of the sexual violence incidences happen. And in this context, rape happened where there are parties or there are bashes. Some of the men deliberately planning to be able, they'll be discussing amongst themselves that, tonight I'm taking one home, setting up these parties, setting up these bashes, so that, with the plan to do something at the end. We also learned about poor institutional responses in some of the campuses, where we found women reporting that there was limited support, but some of them highlighting that, they've lost trust in the system itself. They would, the issues of privacy, they think it's not there amongst the student support staff. They would rather not report because they do not feel that they'll be afforded the help that they need, but also the privacy, talking about why should I go and report to that office when tomorrow I'll be seen, walking around in campus and I'll be labeled. So all of those issues were highlighted. But amongst the staff itself, we found that many of them reported being overloaded, having to deal with a number of issues as the student support units, reporting that they're not only supposed to be assisting students, but some of them are also doing NASFA's, administration. And that for them was a problem because they felt that it was a bit overwhelming to be able to do this. But we also learned that amongst the students who experienced sexual violence and went and reported these issues, they found from their experience, they thought that there was lack of punitive measures for the perpetrators. And at the end of the day, they felt that they had not gotten the help that they needed. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of a theoretical underpinnings that we are basing our study on. Having learned all that we learned about the drivers of sexual violence in these institutions, we then identified modifiable risk factors. We asked ourselves, what are some of the things that can be modifiable to be able, to help young women to prevent this experience of sexual violence? And one of the things was sensitizing young women about the risk of sexual violence. When are you most likely to be violated? What are some of the risk factors? What are some of the men that are more likely, to violate you sexually? We also spoke to them about what they can do in context where they see that I'm at risk of sexual violence. We talk about building self-confidence, empowering them around sexual violence issues, building their self-esteem, but also helping them to deal with some of the structural issues. For example, issues of budgeting, issues of, how to navigate the system itself. When you come in, there's pressure, but how do you still cope in that context? We also spoke to them about gender norms. We spoke about violence. Those are some of the risk factors that we thought they are modifiable and we can assist young women navigate. So I'll be talking to you now about the intervention itself, how it was developed, the process that we followed to develop the intervention. I've spoken to you about the formative research that we conducted. We then analyzed the data the theory of change. I've just spoken to it in the previous slide. We then set as a team, drawing and adapting from other interventions that have been found to be effective in other settings. And one of them was the EAAA, which was developed for Canadian students or Canadian campuses, which was found to be effective in addressing sexual assault risk and helping young women to resist sexual violence. We also built from the Stepping Stones intervention, which is an intervention that was tested in the Eastern Cape and other settings in South Africa and found to be effective to address sexual gender-based violence. We also drawing from the SASA intervention, which was developed in Uganda and also found to be effective. But through this, we then drew from the new content in these settings. What is particularly important? What are some of the things that we can, impact on to be able to prevent sexual violence? From then, after developing the intervention, and the sessions in a manualized format, we went and reviewed it amongst our peers. We sent it to the other colleagues to review it. We revised the draft in the draft sessions. We recruited and trained facilitators from the institutions, from the TVETs, from the universities. After the recruitment, these are the people who then implemented our interventions in these institutions. They went, they implemented, we revised the sessions. We first through the training, we moved to the revision. We then finalized the intervention. We sent them to the sites to pilot the intervention. They worked in 8 sites where they implemented the interventions. At that point, we started with the data collection so we can be able to track progress and see if there's any change. We administered the survey, we administered the FGDs, we administered the intervention, the interviews. We then evaluated after 1 year follow-up. We then, from there, we drew data, we did the analysis to be able to assess acceptability and feasibility of the intervention and finalize the manual. This is the intervention, just a snapshot of the Ntombi Vimbela intervention that I've been talking to you about. It is a risk reduction and resistance manualized intervention for 18-year to 30-year-old female students in South African higher education. For those of you who are not Zulu or Xhosa, Ntombi means girl or woman, or Zulu, it's a Xhosa or a Zulu word. Vimbela is, it means to prevent, to resist, to restrain, to block, or to deter. So these are the key themes that are covered in Ntombi Vimbela. I think I'm just going to direct you to the colorful bubbles there on your right, where you can see, starting from the green bubble on top, Ntombi Vimbela takes young women through a session where they deal with material pressures. Actually, let's start on the purple bubble on your right. We start the workshop by getting to know each other. We teach young women how to assert themselves. There's a session that focuses on sex and consent. We talk about men and relationships, men, women, and relationships. We talk about violence against women and how to support somebody who's experienced violence. We talk about maintaining well-being. We take young women through a session where, they are taught how to assess sexual assault risk, and the next one being how to resist. And the resistance component is where we teach young women how to do self-defense, how to verbally and non-verbally resist risky sexual assault situation. The delivery methods we use here, we use participatory learning approaches. We brainstorm with them, we reflect together, we work in pairs and small groups. There's lots of games and energizers because this is there are 10 workshops of 3.5-hour sessions. So these are done so we can keep young women engaged. Also a reflective process of learning and brainstorming rather than a teaching approach to the intervention. So at the end of the workshops, we then sat with young women. We conducted what we called a closing FGD, where we evaluated how they experienced the 10 workshops that they have been through. We asked young women to reflect on Ntombi Vimbela Is this something that, is applicable in their daily lives? How they found the content of the intervention. Was it relevant to their day-to-day experiences, to their daily lives? How they found the topics, we also reflect with them how the activities were. And this is just to assess the delivery methods that we used. So this is some of the preliminary data that came from the interviews that we had about hearing feedback about the intervention that we piloted. Most participants said they found NV relevant, relatable, and appropriate in their daily lives. I have snapshots there of some of the things that they said, that it was relevant to me. It speaks to something that I'm experiencing every day. But also others spoke about how it improved communication, that after having gone through the workshops, they felt that they can now communicate better. They are more assertive in their relationships. They are able to self-express to their partners. They are able to initiate some of the conversations that were difficult to talk about before. Some of them said it improved their self-confidence and bodily autonomy. There I have a quotation of a young woman who said she was struggling with her appearance, but after having gone through the workshop, she felt that her self-esteem was bolstered and that she is now more confident and no longer cares what other people think about her body. She now walks confidently, and that has reduced stress for her. We also found that Ntombi Vimbela had shifted gender beliefs, and some of them had started to challenge harmful gender norms. A young woman here talking about a home where she's coming from and saying how that has changed because she was taught in a particular way, knowing that, men are supposed to do things this way, women are supposed to do things this way. Now she felt that she's able to challenge some of the things and, some of the background that she's coming from. Some of them highlighted that they now feel confident should sexual violence happen, should she encounter a risky sexual assault situation. They said that they felt much more comfortable to be able to resist. Others also highlighted that Ntombi Vimbela, for the first time, it gave them an opportunity to talk about their experiences of sexual violence, because some of them, had bottled these experiences. They had not spoken about it before, but feeling that it kind of gave them a safe space where they could be able to talk about their experience amongst other women who understand and have gone through the similar experience, being able to receive empathy in these workshops. So what are the key messages that we came up with from having done all of this work? Really, these are the take-home key points that I want you to take with you. NV content was relevant. Ntombi Vimbela content was very, very relevant amongst young women. It's relatable, it's something that they can relate with. It is appropriate for first-year female students. These are, drawn from the data that we got from them. Training these peer students and working with student support staff in this institution to deliver intervention was very good. It went well because we're also wanting to assess the methods and how that goes. We found that we could still train peer facilitators, have them be the ones that implement the intervention, and still achieving the fidelity of the intervention, doing it the way that it was intended to be done. We have shown that Ntombi Vimbela is an evidence-informed intervention. It's multi-component in that it's addressing various components relating to gender transformation, resilience building, mental health focus, sexual risk identification, and resistance. The pilot has also highlighted for us that, Ntombi Vimbela is empowering. Female students felt empowered. They felt that they are now much more confident to be able to resist. But if somebody fails to resist and they encounter a situation, they know how to resist using the self-defense strategies or skills that they've been through. However, having found all this positive feedback, we understand that Ntombi Vimbela was not tested through a trial. This was just a small pilot that we did So as in terms of future work, we would still want to do a well-designed impact evaluation where we will have a control group, take these young women through an intervention, have the intervention group, have a control group, and assess the effectiveness of the intervention. But also as part of the planned future work that we have now worked with these young women. We know that they are in relationships with other people, can be a man or a female. But our target or a next step in terms of the work that we want to do, we want to work with men. We want to develop, adapt an intervention for young men because we heard a lot about perpetration of sexual violence and what drives that. So we want to be able to develop and test that intervention amongst young men in higher education institutions. So I've spoken about this future work that we're going to do, but just to summarize again, we are planning to do a trial of Ntombi Vimbela where we'll have a control group. We plan to work with young men. We also planning to conduct a cost effectiveness study to be able to assess how much this costs to do. Just to acknowledge the key people that have been helpful in helping us to do the work. We are really grateful to the work and the collaboration that we've had with the National Department of Higher Education and Training, to the SAMRC, our organization that has funded this work. We are really grateful. None of it could have been done without the support that we got from them. But also to acknowledge the funding that we got from the University of California Global Health Institute that has provided a grant for us to do this work. Thank you very much for listening. I am going to allow us some time to discuss, and if you have any questions, please raise them. Thank you very much, colleagues. I've just shared with you a work that we have conducted in higher education institutions where we conducted formative research. We developed an intervention, we piloted an intervention amongst young women, which has shown preliminary evidence of efficacy. I would just like to thank you for inviting us to come and present our work. Hope we can have, we can collaborate in future, work more together, and try to address and prevent sexual violence, which is a big problem in institutions of higher learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sissy. Are you happy with your presentation?
It's fine. It's fine, really. It's fine.
Okay. No, I have nothing to add. I think everything went well. So just to give you a heads up, on the day when you're going to be speaking, I think you are on webinar 5, right? The last webinar.
So how long did this take, just so I can have an idea? I'll try and cut some. I felt it took too long.
No, I think it's okay. It's about 25 minutes, I think. And I think that's the time that you were allocated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said webinar 5. What time is it? A 10 o'clock slot?
Yes, but because you're going to be a speaker and participating in the Q&A, we're asking all our speakers to be on the platform 30 minutes before.
That's 9:30.
9:30, yeah.
Okay.
So from 9:30, you will be there. So there will be a quick briefing session. You'll meet the moderator. And then from there, we will just ask you to wait until we go live. So that means then, on average, the day is going to be about 3 hours max. So you'll be there from 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, 1:30. So it's quite a longish day. Yeah. So, so that's basically where you're going to be for the rest of that day. I think it's a Thursday.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's not a Thursday. It's a Monday rather, because that's the 20th.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then we're also going to be creating a WhatsApp group. That WhatsApp group, it will only be valid for the day, and it will only be for the speakers, and it's purely to give you support, or if you're experiencing any issues on your end, you can pop the question on the WhatsApp group and we'll answer the question. And if you need us to call you, we'll call you.
Okay.
And then when you're done with the speaking, so at the end of the day, we're going to then, delete that WhatsApp group. So you shouldn't be bogged down by any other chit chat or whatever.
Okay.
Okay.
So this recording will only be used if there are any technical glitches, right?
So according to Gerda, who's the coordinator, we're going to play this recording as the main recording. So the only time you'll be speaking live will be at Q&A.
So are we able to review this before it goes?
I can send you the link so you can see how you did, but we may not be able to change it.
Yeah, I'll speak together. No, just to get a sense of what it says before I see it.
No, for sure. As soon as we get a link of this recording, we can forward it to you. So just to have a look.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right then. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, if you have any questions, I called you earlier, so you're welcome to send me a text message or call me.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. Have a good day. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.